My name is Maya Washington, 34 years old, and until last Tuesday, I thought my husband was just an arrogant investment banker with a fragile ego. I was sitting in the living room of our $5 million Buckhead mansion when he walked through the front door with 3 designer suitcases and his young mistress. He tossed his keys on the custom glass table and told me to pack my things and move down to the basement maid quarters because I had nowhere else to go. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply wiped the table clean, smiled, and sent a single text message that would completely dismantle his entire existence. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to smile through the ultimate betrayal while quietly planning your absolute revenge. The morning sun was pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the house I had secretly bought and paid for. I was sitting on my favorite Italian leather armchair, sipping a cup of dark roast coffee, enjoying the absolute quiet of the neighborhood. Buckhead is an exclusive enclave in Atlanta, a place where the wealthiest residents pride themselves on immaculate lawns and quiet discretion. My husband Marcus loved this house. He loved the status it gave him. He loved the way his colleagues at the bank looked at him when he hosted dinner parties. He loved the illusion of absolute wealth. I was the one who managed that illusion. For 5 years of marriage, I played the role of a modest real estate agent who just happened to do well on a few sales. In reality, I was secretly running one of the largest commercial development firms and distressed asset portfolios in the city. Marcus had absolutely no idea about my true net worth. He never bothered to look past his own reflection in the mirror. He only knew what his massive ego allowed him to see, which was a wife he believed he had rescued from a lesser life. The heavy oak front door swung open with a sudden jarring force that shattered the morning peace. I did not turn around immediately. I listened to the sound of heavy wheels rolling across the imported marble foyer. One set of footsteps belonged to Marcus, heavy and self-important. The other set was lighter, accompanied by the sharp clicking of expensive heels. I took another slow sip of my coffee before turning my head. Marcus stood in the center of the living room wearing a tailored suit that I knew he could barely afford on his banking salary. Next to him stood a woman I recognized immediately from the careless social media posts Marcus thought he had hidden so well: Chloe. She was 26 years old, an aspiring lifestyle influencer who documented every meal, every outfit, and every rented luxury car on the internet for strangers to validate. She was holding her phone up, panning it across my living room, already recording content for her followers. She wore oversized sunglasses indoors and a smug expression that perfectly matched my husband's face. Marcus did not look guilty. He did not look ashamed. He looked completely and utterly arrogant. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his heavy ring of keys, and tossed them carelessly onto the delicate glass coffee table in front of me. The metal scratched the pristine surface, leaving a harsh, ugly sound hanging in the air. "Chloe is moving in?" Marcus announced, his voice loud and completely devoid of empathy. He crossed his arms over his chest, looking down at me as if I were a piece of furniture he had decided to replace. "We are taking the master bedroom. You need to gather your things and clear out of that space by noon today." I looked at the keys, then at Marcus, and finally at Chloe, who was now busy inspecting the crystal chandelier above us. The sheer audacity of the moment washed over me in slow, heavy waves. He brought a mistress into my home. He brought a mistress into my sanctuary. He brought a mistress into the very trap I had been carefully setting for years. I sat perfectly still, letting the reality of his profound stupidity settle into my bones. "I suppose you expect me to leave the house entirely," I said, my voice dangerously calm and measured. Marcus let out a short, mocking laugh that echoed in the large room. "And go where, Maya? You do not have anywhere else to go. You do not have the money to afford rent in the zip code on your salary, and I know you are not going to crawl back to the slums. No, you can stay for now. You can move down to the maid quarters in the basement. It is out of the way, and it will keep you off the streets until we finalize the divorce and I figure out a settlement. Consider it my final act of charity toward you." The basement. the small, windowless room next to the laundry area that we used for seasonal storage. My husband of 5 years was moving his mistress into our custom-designed master suite and banishing me to the basement like an unwanted servant. I felt a cold, hard knot of pure focus form in my chest. Chloe finally lowered her phone and sauntered over to where I was sitting. She looked me up and down, her eyes full of the kind of fake pity that is meant to insult rather than comfort. She reached out without asking, picked up my coffee mug from the side table, and took a sip. Her face immediately contorted into a mask of disgust. "This is terrible!" she groaned, setting the mug down so hard that dark liquid sloshed over the rim and pooled on the glass table. "How can you drink it this bitter? Marcus told me you grew up in the slums of East Atlanta, but I figured living here with him would have upgraded your tastes by now. I guess people who grow up sleeping near basements are just used to the dark. You will feel right at home down there." She looked at Marcus for validation, and he rewarded her with an affectionate smile, wrapping his arm around her waist. They stood there, a united front of cruelty and ignorance, fully expecting me to break down. They wanted me to scream. They wanted me to cry. They wanted me to throw a hysterical fit so they could call me crazy and justify their terrible actions to themselves and their friends. They insulted my roots. They insulted my home. They insulted the very struggle that had forged me into a millionaire while they drowned in fake credit card debt. I slowly stood up from the leather armchair. I did not raise my voice. I did not let a single tear touch my face. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and pulled out a small silk handkerchief. I leaned forward and methodically wiped up the spilled coffee on the glass table. I wiped until the surface was perfectly clear, erasing the mess Chloe had made just as I was preparing to erase both of them from my life. "You are absolutely right," I said softly, my voice perfectly steady. "East Atlanta teaches you how to survive in the dark. It teaches you how to see the rats before they see you coming." Marcus frowned, clearly unnerved by my complete lack of an emotional breakdown. "Stop being weird, Maya. Just go pack your bags right now. Chloe wants to bring her interior design team in this afternoon to look at the master bathroom, and I do not want you in the way." Chloe smiled, tracing her manicured finger along Marcus's lapel. "Actually, I want all your clothes out of the walk-in closet immediately. I have a huge brand sponsorship delivery coming today, and I need the entire space cleared for my new wardrobe. Do not leave any of your cheap suits behind." I looked at Chloe, really looked at her. She was wearing a diamond tennis bracelet that I knew for a fact Marcus had bought using our joint business checking account. She was standing in a house she did not own, demanding space in a closet she had no right to touch, leaning on a man whose entire financial existence was a delicate house of cards I had personally co-signed and quietly controlled. "I will clear the space," I said, offering her a sweet, empty smile. "Take all the time you need to settle in." I turned my back on them and walked toward the grand staircase. I felt their triumphant gazes burning into my back. They thought they had won the ultimate prize. They thought they had successfully humiliated the poor, helpless real estate agent. As I reached the first landing, completely out of their line of sight, I pulled my phone from my pocket. I opened my secure messaging application and selected the contact for Jordan, my lead attorney and chief operating officer at my real estate development firm. I typed a single simple message: "Activate Protocol 1." The message sent immediately. Protocol 1 was the complete and total freezing of all secondary financial lines, the immediate calling in of all outstanding personal debts, and the beginning of the corporate legal eviction process. Marcus thought he was the king of the castle today. He had absolutely no idea that he had just handed the keys of his life over to the executioner. The total demolition of Marcus Sterling had officially begun, and I was going to enjoy every single second of it. The morning sun barely had time to filter through the kitchen windows before the heavy mahogany front door swung open. Beatrice Sterling never knocked. She treated my house with the same entitlement her son did. I stood by the marble island holding a fresh mug of black coffee, watching my mother-in-law march inside. She carried a massive artisanal gift basket overflowing with imported truffles, caviar, and vintage champagne. She walked right past me. Her eyes locked instantly onto Chloe, who was floating down the stairs in my custom silk robe. "Good morning, darling," Beatrice cooed, handing the massive basket to Chloe. "You must be exhausted from the move. I brought you some essentials to help you settle into the master suite." Chloe giggled, accepting the basket with a dramatic gasp. "You are too sweet, Beatrice. Marcus told me his mother had impeccable taste, but this is beyond perfect." Beatrice patted Chloe on the cheek and then turned her attention to me. The warm maternal smile vanished in an instant, replaced by a tight, practiced grimace. She marched into the kitchen, her expensive heels clicking aggressively against the tile. She dropped a thick manila folder onto the kitchen island right next to my coffee mug. "Let us stop pretending," Maya Beatrice commanded, her voice sharp and echoing in the large space. "You know exactly why I am here. It is time for you to sign the divorce papers. Marcus had his attorney draw these up last night. You will leave quietly, and you will leave with exactly what you brought into this family, which is absolutely nothing." I glanced down at this folder. I did not reach for it. I did not flinch. I just took a slow sip of my coffee. "You expect me to walk away empty-handed from a house I spent 5 years paying the mortgage on?" Beatrice let out a harsh, barking laugh. "Please, Maya, do not embarrass yourself by acting like you have any financial claim here. You are just a glorified tour guide. Marcus is the one doing the real work. In fact, he already took the liberty of clearing out your little joint savings account yesterday afternoon. He used it to buy Chloe that beautiful new Range Rover sitting in the driveway. A woman of her status needs a safe, reliable vehicle. You, on the other hand, can take the subway to your pathetic little house showings." The revelation hung in the air. My husband had drained our joint account to buy his mistress a luxury car. A normal wife would have screamed. A normal wife would have thrown the hot coffee in Beatrice's perfectly lifted face. I simply nodded, processing the fact that Marcus had just committed financial fraud against my private holding company since that joint account was legally tied to my corporate assets. He had just handed me the exact rope I needed to hang him. Chloe sauntered into the kitchen, leaning against Marcus, who had just walked in, rubbing his eyes. Beatrice turned to her new favorite person, her face softening into a sickening display of affection. She reached for her left hand and dramatically pulled off the massive emerald-cut diamond ring she wore on her index finger. It was the infamous Sterling family heirloom, a piece of jewelry Beatrice paraded around at every country club dinner to prove their old money status. Beatrice reached out and slid the heavy diamond onto Chloe's finger. Chloe gasped loudly, holding her hand up to the light. "The Sterling family needs a daughter-in-law with true image value," Beatrice announced, her voice rising, so I would not miss a single syllable. "We need someone who understands high society. We do not need a desperate real estate agent who sweats in the sun all day begging strangers to buy overpriced condos. This ring belongs to a woman who will elevate the Sterling name." Marcus kissed Chloe on the cheek, looking incredibly proud of himself. "See, I told you my mother would love you." I turned my back on the sickening display. I calmly walked over to the stove, picked up the kettle, and began preparing a cup of chamomile tea. "The diamond is stunning on you, Chloe," I said over my shoulder, keeping my tone light and conversational. "It truly suits your vibe." Beatrice scoffed, clearly irritated that her grand insult had failed to make me cry. "Come along, Chloe," Beatrice said, grabbing the girl's arm. "Let me show you the landscaping plans I have in mind for the backyard. We need to rip out all of Maya's cheap rose bushes." Marcus followed them out the back door, eagerly discussing how they would tear apart the garden I had built with my own 2 hands. The heavy glass door slid shut behind them, leaving me alone in the kitchen. I poured the hot water into my teacup. As I reached for a spoon on the island, my eyes caught a small, folded piece of thick stationery resting near the manila divorce folder. Beatrice must have accidentally pulled it out of her designer purse when she threw the documents onto the counter. I set my teacup down. I picked up the paper and unfolded it. It was a certificate of authenticity and insurance for the heirloom diamond ring Beatrice had just placed on Chloe's finger. But my eyes did not focus on the carat weight or the clarity grade. My eyes locked onto the name listed under the registered owner. The name on the certificate was not Beatrice Sterling. It was not Richard Sterling. It was not anyone from their supposedly wealthy old money lineage. The ring was registered to Apex Collateral Loans, a high-interest pawn agency in downtown Atlanta, known for catering to desperate people faking their wealth. I stared at the paper, a genuine smile finally breaking across my face. The mighty Sterling family with their country club memberships and pure arrogance were drowning in debt. They did not own the heirloom. They were renting it. I folded the paper, slipped it securely into my pocket, and pulled out my phone to text my lawyer. The game had completely changed. The loud clinking of crystal wine glasses echoed down the hallway, reaching me in the quiet shadows of the kitchen. Marcus had ordered dinner from the most exclusive Italian restaurant in Buckhead, paying an absurd premium to have it delivered and plated by private servers just to impress his sister Jasmine and her husband Brad. They were gathered around the massive mahogany dining table, a table I had imported directly from Milan, using my own private corporate funds. Now it was acting as the stage for their pathetic celebration of my replacement. Chloe was seated in my usual chair at the opposite end of the table from Marcus. She was wearing a shimmering cocktail dress that was completely inappropriate for a family dinner, laughing loudly at every single thing Brad said. Jasmine sat next to her, pouring more wine into Chloe's glass, acting as if they had been best friends for a decade. Jasmine had always hated me. From the very first day Marcus introduced us, she made it her personal mission to remind me that I did not belong in their elevated social circle. She constantly criticized my practical clothing, my quiet demeanor, and my absolute refusal to waste money on designer handbags. She genuinely thought I was dragging her brother down. She had no idea I was the only reason her brother was not currently drowning in bankruptcy court. I stepped out of the shadows and walked into the dining room to retrieve my laptop from the side credenza. I had planned to quietly gather my things and head back down to the basement, playing the role of the defeated wife perfectly. But the moment my foot crossed the threshold, the entire room erupted into exaggerated, mocking laughter. They wanted me to hear them. They wanted me to feel the sting of my absolute replacement. Brad was leaning far back in his chair. His face flushed a deep, unhealthy red from the excessive amount of alcohol he had already consumed. Brad was a venture capitalist, though that title was incredibly generous. He managed a small fund, bankrolled entirely by his father's old money connections. He loved to portray himself as a self-made business genius, a brilliant mind who knew exactly how to spot a winning deal. In reality, he was a loud, arrogant man who lost significantly more money than he made, constantly relying on his family name to bail him out of terrible financial investments. Brad slammed his crystal wine glass onto the table, the dark red liquid splashing dangerously close to the rim. He pointed a heavy, accusatory finger directly at me, his eyes locked onto Marcus. "Great job, man." Brad slurred, his voice booming across the elegant room. His words were thick and sloppy, completely stripped of any polite filter. "You finally dropped the dead weight." Marcus smirked proudly, puffing his chest out as he looked at Chloe. Chloe giggled and blew him a kiss across the table. Brad pushed his chair back and stood up, swaying slightly on his feet. He looked me up and down with a gaze full of absolute disgust and unearned superiority. He did not bother to lower his voice. "Let us be brutally honest here, Marcus," Brad continued, taking a staggering step toward me. "She brought that poor East Atlanta poverty mindset into this house for way too long. You can dress someone up in expensive clothes, but you cannot wash off the slums. It was dragging your personal brand down. You are a top-tier banker. You need a woman who understands high society, not someone who pinches pennies and acts like a peasant. It is definitely time for an upgrade." He gestured grandly toward Chloe, who beamed brightly under the compliment. The casual, blatant bigotry in his voice was not new to me. Brad had always spoken to me with a subtle undertone of classist and racist superiority, assuming that because I grew up poor and black, I was inherently less intelligent and less valuable than his country club peers. He equated my humble beginnings with an inability to understand the complex world of finance. If he only knew that my personal net worth could buy and sell his father's entire portfolio 10 times over without making a dent in my accounts. Jasmine chimed in immediately, her voice sharp and eager to twist the knife. Exactly, Brad is entirely right, she sneered, crossing her arms as she glared at me. You have been eating off my brother for 5 years, Maya. 5 solid years of free rent in a Buckhead mansion while you pretend to play real estate agent showing cheap apartments to nobodies. It is honestly pathetic how much you have drained him. You should be down on your knees thanking him for letting you stay in the basement tonight instead of throwing you out on the street where you belong. I stood perfectly still by the credenza, my hands resting lightly on my laptop. My face remained a calm, unreadable mask. I did not offer them a single tear. I did not give them the satisfaction of a furious outburst. Inside, my mind was running through the beautiful destructive mechanics of Protocol 1. They were so incredibly drunk on their own perceived superiority that they could not see the massive legal and financial sinkhole opening up directly beneath their expensive leather shoes. Brad stumbled back to his chair and threw his arm heavily around Marcus's shoulders, nearly spilling his wine again. "We are playing in the big leagues now, baby," Brad boasted, raising his glass higher into the air. "Tell her, Marcus. Tell the little freeloader about our massive new venture. Let her know exactly what she is missing out on." Marcus sat up straighter, looking like an arrogant little boy showing off a stolen prize. "We closed the deal today," Marcus announced to the table, his voice full of self-importance. $5 million in seed capital. We are launching our own private equity firm. Brad let out a loud, obnoxious bark of laughter. "And do you want to know the absolute best part? We just mortgaged this very house to get the initial capital, $5 million in cold hard cash ready to deploy into our new shell company. We are going to double it in 6 months. So you better pack your cheap bags quickly and quietly, Maya. The bank appraisers are coming next week to do a full walkthrough of the property, and we absolutely cannot have a squatter living in the basement. It would ruin the property value." The sheer magnitude of their stupidity was breathtaking. It was almost poetic. Marcus had actually tried to take out a $5 million commercial mortgage on a property he did not legally own. When I purchased this estate 3 years ago, I used a blind trust layered beneath a corporate holding company. Marcus was so obsessed with his image that when I handed him a fake set of title documents with his name printed in bold letters, he never once thought to verify them with the county clerk. He strutted around Buckhead telling everyone he bought the house with his banking bonuses. I let him have the glory because it kept him docile and distracted. He thought his name was on the deed. He thought the fraudulent financial documents he had his shady banking friends draft would actually hold up in a legitimate institution. He had absolutely no idea that my private holding company owned every single brick, every blade of grass, and every inch of this $5 million estate. Furthermore, the bank he had used to secure this fraudulent loan was a regional commercial bank where I sat as a silent majority shareholder. Jordan, my chief operating officer, had already intercepted the fraudulent loan application hours ago when I activated the protocol. Marcus and Brad had not secured $5 million. They had just committed massive documented federal wire fraud and property fraud. They had personally signed guarantees on a loan backed by an asset they had zero legal right to leverage. I looked at Marcus soaking in his proud, ignorant smile. Then I looked at Brad, who was currently taking another massive gulp of wine, celebrating his own impending prison sentence. I picked up my laptop and took one slow, deliberate step toward the dining table. The room went quiet for a fraction of a second. They expected me to beg. They expected me to panic at the thought of the house being mortgaged away. I looked directly into Brad's bloodshot, arrogant eyes. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make the air in the room feel thick and uncomfortable. "Did you read the mortgage contract carefully, Brad?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper yet, carrying with crystal clear precision across the silent room. Brad froze with his wine glass halfway to his mouth. The smug, superior smile vanished from his face for one terrifying, agonizing second. His eyes darted to Marcus, a sudden flicker of genuine, unadulterated panic crossing his features. He was a terrible businessman, but even he knew that a question asked with that level of terrifying calm meant someone had missed a fatal detail in the fine print. Marcus looked confused, his brow furrowing as he looked between Brad and me. But Brad's ego was far too massive to let the sudden dread settle in his stomach. He forced a loud booming laugh, waving his hand at me, as if swatting away an annoying insect. "Get out of here, Maya," Brad scoffed, turning his back to me and reaching for the wine bottle. "Go pack your cardboard boxes before I call the neighborhood security to drag you out. You do not know the first thing about corporate finance." I did not say another word. I simply turned and walked out of the dining room, a genuine warm smile playing on my lips. Let them drink their expensive wine. Let them toast to their brilliant future. They were celebrating a $5 million death sentence. They had just personally guaranteed a phantom loan that would trigger a massive federal fraud investigation by the time the sun came up tomorrow. I walked down the hall toward the basement stairs, knowing my time in the dark was almost over, and theirs was just beginning. The piercing shriek of a power saw tore through the quiet morning, vibrating through the floorboards and rattling the antique vases in the downstairs corridor. The noise was deafening, followed immediately by the heavy, sickening thud of sledgehammers against drywall. I set my coffee cup on the kitchen counter, the ceramic clinking against the granite, and walked deliberately toward the grand staircase. The air in the foyer was already thick with a haze of white gypsum dust. As I reached the second-floor landing, the scale of the destruction became fully apparent. The hallway was an absolute disaster zone. My personal belongings, items I had carefully curated over the last decade, were unceremoniously dumped across the expensive hardwood floors. A stack of vintage architectural prints I had sourced from Paris lay scattered, their custom frames cracked. My grandmother's antique cedar jewelry box had been tossed upside down against the baseboards, its delicate brass hinges strained. I stepped over the debris and stood in the doorway of the master suite. The beautiful, understated elegance of the room I had designed was being systematically annihilated. 3 men in heavy work boots were ripping down the custom wainscoting. Standing in the center of the chaos, wearing pristine white designer sneakers and holding a bedazzled clipboard, was Chloe. She was pointing a manicured finger at the far wall, shouting over the noise of the power tools. "Tear it all out. Every single piece of that depressing beige trim needs to be gone by lunch. I want the space completely gutted." I stepped over the threshold, positioning myself directly between a worker wielding a sledgehammer and the remaining intact wall of the walk-in closet. The worker paused, lowering his tool and looking back and forth between me and the screaming woman in the center of the room. "What exactly do you think you are doing?" I asked, my voice cutting through the dust-filled air with a sharp, icy precision. Chloe spun around, her eyes narrowing as she took me in. She let out an exasperated sigh and rolled her eyes dramatically. "I am fixing this sterile, boring room. Marcus promised me a master suite fit for a queen, and frankly, your taste is embarrassingly cheap. I am having the contractors tear out this entire wall to expand the bathroom. We are putting in an imported pink marble soaking tub and a completely mirrored ceiling. It is going to be incredibly glamorous." Before I could respond to the sheer tackiness of her vision, heavy footsteps pounded up the stairs behind me. Marcus shoved his way into the room, his face flushed with irritation. He glared at me aggressively, stepping into my personal space to physically intimidate me. "Get out of the way, Maya," Marcus barked, waving his hand as if trying to swat me aside. "Stop interfering with the construction crew. I gave Chloe full authorization to redesign the suite. She actually has an eye for luxury, unlike you. You authorized a massive demolition project without pulling a single municipal permit," I stated calmly, looking at the structural beam they were preparing to cut. "You are going to compromise the load-bearing walls of a $5 million estate to install a pink marble tub." Marcus let out a loud, condescending laugh. He reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a heavily creased document, shaking the paper directly in my face. "I do not need your permission, and I certainly do not need a lecture on real estate from a mediocre agent. I am the sole owner of this property. I have the deed, the title, and the full power of attorney regarding any and all structural modifications." Marcus tapped the paper aggressively. "I can tear this entire house down to the raw dirt if I feel like it. You are just a guest here, a temporary squatter. Do not ever question my authority in my own home again." He was so remarkably confident in his own lies. The document he was waving around was a worthless piece of paper drawn up by a shady lawyer friend carrying absolutely zero legal weight against my corporate holding company. But I did not point that out. I let him bask in his fake superiority. Chloe sidled up next to him, wrapping her arms around his waist and resting her chin on his shoulder. She looked at me with a triumphant, malicious gleam in her eyes. She lifted her bedazzled clipboard, flipping it open to show off a stack of glossy invoices. "You should be thanking us, Maya. We are increasing the property value. I just finalized the materials order this morning. $500,000 in custom renovations. We ordered 24-karat gold-plated fixtures, velvet-lined acoustic walls, and a custom-built Italian vanity. Marcus is paying for all of it in cash from his massive new venture capital fund, $500,000. They were taking the fraudulent loan money they had illegally secured against my property and pouring $500,000 of it into destroying a master bedroom to make it look like a cheap nightclub. Every dollar they spent was another federal wire fraud charge. Every gold-plated fixture was another piece of evidence my legal team would submit to the district attorney. I looked at the shattered frames in the hallway, then back at Marcus's smug face. I let my shoulders drop just a fraction of an inch, perfectly mimicking the body language of a defeated, broken woman. I lowered my gaze to the floor, staring at the white drywall dust covering my shoes. "Fine," I said softly, my voice laced with fake resignation. "Do whatever you want. It is your house, Marcus. I will not get in the way of your renovations." Marcus smirked, clearly thrilled by my submission. He turned his back to me, wrapping his arm around Chloe's waist and kissing the top of her head. "That is right. Go back down to the basement where you belong and let the adults handle the real money. Come on, babe, let us go look at the tile samples for the steam shower." They walked toward the far end of the gutted suite, completely ignoring my presence, completely convinced they had won the ultimate victory. I slowly turned around to leave the room. As I stepped back into the debris-covered hallway, the loud grinding of the power saw started up again. A tall, broad-shouldered man, wearing a heavy canvas work jacket and a yellow hard hat, walked past me, carrying a stack of demolition blueprints. He was the head contractor, the man Chloe believed she had hired off an exclusive designer registry. As he brushed past me in the narrow hallway, safely out of sight from the happy couple in the master bedroom, the contractor abruptly stopped. He dropped his gruff blue-collar posture. He stood perfectly straight, bowed his head toward me with profound, unmistakable respect, and leaned in close. "Everything is going exactly according to your plan, boss," he whispered, his voice completely devoid of any contractor accent, revealing the polished tone of a senior corporate operative. "The demolition costs have been heavily inflated and billed directly to his new corporate account. We have secured the wire transfers." I looked up at the man, the undercover asset Jordan had seamlessly planted into Chloe's fake luxury design firm 2 days ago. I let a slow, predatory smile spread across my face. I gave him a single approving nod. "Keep letting them spend," I whispered back. "Let them drain the entire account." I walked down the stairs, leaving the deafening noise of my own trap snapping shut behind me. The white dust from the second floor settled behind me as I descended the grand staircase. The deafening roar of sledgehammers faded, replaced immediately by a high-pitched artificial voice echoing from the formal living room. I paused at the bottom step. The living room, a space I had meticulously decorated with understated mid-century modern pieces, now looked like a chaotic loading dock for a luxury department store. Towering stacks of bright orange Hermes boxes, pristine white Chanel bags, and massive Louis Vuitton garment bags were piled haphazardly across my custom velvet sofas. In the center of this ridiculous mountain of cardboard and tissue paper sat Chloe. She had set up a professional ring light and a tripod, her phone recording her every move as she ripped through satin ribbons with manicured claws. "Look at this incredible crocodile Birkin, you guys!" Chloe squealed into the camera, holding up a handbag that cost more than a starter home. "Marcus is just spoiling me completely today. He said a future billionaire's wife needs a wardrobe that commands absolute respect." I am literally shaking. Marcus was lounging in my favorite leather reading chair, sipping scotch from a crystal tumbler. He looked like a man who had just conquered the world, completely oblivious to the fact that his entire empire was built on quicksand. He watched Chloe tear into another $1,000 pair of shoes with a smug, self-satisfied grin. He was playing the role of the limitless provider funding his new mistress's shopping spree with the $5 million fraudulent commercial loan he had secured against my property. Every single box Chloe ripped open represented another count of grand larceny. I walked quietly into the room heading toward the kitchen archway. I had zero intention of engaging with their pathetic performance. But Marcus spotted me. His eyes lit up with malicious glee. He sat forward, setting his scotch glass down onto a stack of discarded tissue paper. "Going somewhere?" Maya Marcus called out, his voice loud enough to ensure Chloe's livestream microphone would pick up every word. "Are you heading out to look for a cardboard box to sleep in tonight?" Chloe gasped dramatically, covering her mouth with her hand as she looked at her phone screen, pretending to be shocked by his cruelty while her eyes danced with excitement. I stopped and turned slowly to face him. "I do not need a cardboard box, Marcus. I have a $5 million estate right here." Marcus let out a loud, mocking laugh that bounced off the high ceilings. "Not anymore, you do not. In fact, you do not have anything. I made a few phone calls to my personal wealth manager this morning while you were upstairs crying over a bathtub. I froze every single one of your credit cards. I locked you out of the joint checking account. I even canceled the supplementary gas card you keep in your purse. You are entirely cut off." He leaned back, crossing his arms over his chest, waiting for me to panic. He expected me to fall to my knees. He expected me to scream that I needed money for groceries, that I had bills to pay, that he was leaving me destitute. "You have been riding my coattails for 5 years, he sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "You thought you could just stay in this house and keep leeching off my banking salary. But I am done carrying dead weight. You have exactly $0 to your name. You cannot even afford to buy a cup of coffee right now, let alone hire a divorce attorney. You are going to sign the papers my mother brought you, and you are going to walk out that front door with absolutely nothing." The sheer delusion was staggering. He had locked me out of an account that held a mere $10,000, an account I used exclusively for minor household expenses to maintain the illusion that we shared finances. He genuinely believed that was the extent of my wealth. He had no concept of the corporate holding structures, the offshore trusts, and the 8-figure investment portfolios sitting securely under my maiden name. Chloe saw an opportunity to elevate her live stream. She grabbed her phone off the tripod, keeping the camera rolling, and sauntered over to where I was standing. She shoved the phone directly into my face, the bright recording light blinding me for a second. "Oh my goodness, you guys!" Chloe cooed into the camera, her voice dripping with fake, sugary sympathy. "This is Marcus's ex-wife. Her name is Maya. She just found out she has absolutely nothing left. She does not even have a dime to buy food today. It is honestly so pitiful. It breaks my heart to see someone fall so far because they just could not keep their man happy. Send some heart emojis in the chat for poor broke Maya." She held the phone inches from my nose, waiting for me to swat it away, waiting for me to cry or throw a tantrum that she could broadcast to her thousands of strangers. She wanted to brand me as the hysterical, penniless ex-wife. I did not flinch. I did not blink. I looked directly into the camera lens. I let a slow, terrifyingly calm smile spread across my face. I reached into the inner pocket of my tailored blazer and pulled out my personal phone. I unlocked the screen with a steady hand. "You know Chloe?" I said, my voice smooth and perfectly modulated, cutting through her fake baby voice. "I was just thinking about how much excess there is in the world, how some people spend thousands of dollars on empty cardboard boxes while others actually need help." I opened my banking application. I navigated to the philanthropic portal I used for my private foundation. I have been meaning to finalize my annual contribution to the Atlanta Women's Shelter. I continued, keeping my eyes locked on her phone camera. They build housing for women who are forced to start over. It is a wonderful cause. Marcus snorted from his chair. "Are you delusional? I just told you that your cards are declined. You cannot donate a single cent. You are broke, Maya. Stop embarrassing yourself on the internet." I ignored him completely. I tapped the donation amount on my screen. $100,000. I did not pull out the standard silver bank card Marcus was used to seeing. I reached into my leather card holder and retrieved a heavy, solid piece of metal. It was a matte black American Express Centurion card, a financial instrument issued exclusively by private invitation to clients with 8-figure net worths. It had no limit. It was a card Marcus had only ever read about in financial magazines, a card he could never dream of qualifying for. I held the heavy black titanium card up, letting the ring light catch the metallic glint. I tapped it against the back of my phone. The payment terminal application processed the massive transaction in less than 3 seconds. A loud, crisp, and undeniable electronic beep echoed through the living room, followed instantly by a bright green checkmark illuminating my screen. Transaction approved. $100,000 transferred successfully. Chloe's mouth fell open. The fake sympathetic pout vanished, completely replaced by utter shock. She stared at the green checkmark on my screen, her eyes wide and uncomprehending. She knew what that black card meant. Everyone who worshipped wealth knew exactly what that card represented. Marcus dropped his crystal tumbler. The heavy glass hit the hardwood floor with a sharp crack, spilling amber liquid across the expensive rug. He scrambled to his feet, his face draining of all color. "Where did you get that?" Marcus demanded, his voice shaking, pitching up in sudden panic. "Whose card is that? You do not have that kind of money. I locked your accounts. I locked everything." Chloe's hand trembled so violently that the phone slipped from her grasp. It hit the floor with a loud smack, the camera spinning wildly before staring up at the ceiling, still broadcasting live to her audience. I calmly slipped the black titanium card back into my holder and tucked my phone away. I stepped around the dropped phone and looked at Marcus, my smile widening. "You locked a decoy account, Marcus," I said, my voice ringing with absolute authority. "You locked the allowance I let you manage so you could feel like a big man. But you cannot lock an account you never knew existed. And you certainly cannot lock the accounts of the holding company that actually owns this $5 million house." I walked past the towering pile of designer boxes, my heels clicking sharply against the floor. "Enjoy the unboxing, Chloe. Make sure you keep the receipts. The federal investigators are going to need a very detailed inventory of exactly how you spent their stolen money." The absolute silence that followed my black card transaction was still ringing in my ears the next morning. Marcus had spent the entire night desperately making phone calls behind closed doors, trying to figure out how a woman he believed was entirely dependent on him possessed an unlimited line of credit. But his bruised ego was quickly overshadowed by a much more pressing immediate crisis. I was sitting in the breakfast nook quietly reading a financial prospectus on my tablet when the heavy footsteps of the construction foreman echoed through the kitchen. He was holding a thick stack of invoices on his clipboard. Right behind him, Chloe was practically hyperventilating, tugging aggressively on Marcus's sleeve. Jasmine and Brad were seated at the island nursing their morning coffees, looking severely hungover from their excessive celebration the night before. "Marcus, you have to do something," Chloe whined, her voice reaching a shrill, piercing pitch that made Brad wince. "The contractor says they are pulling the entire crew. They are packing up the trucks right now. They are going to leave the master suite completely gutted with exposed wires everywhere." Marcus held up his hands, trying to placate her while shooting a nervous glance at the towering foreman. "Just calm down, baby. There is a simple misunderstanding with the bank. The venture capital funds from the mortgage are currently in a mandatory holding period. It is standard federal compliance. The money will be fully cleared and liquid in 48 hours. The foreman crossed his massive muscular arms over his chest, his face an impenetrable mask of blue-collar indifference. "My guys do not work on promises, Mr. Sterling." The foreman stated, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "You authorized $500,000 in custom-imported materials yesterday. Pink marble from Italy, 24-karat gold fixtures, and acoustic velvet paneling. Our suppliers require an immediate cash deposit of $250,000 to place those orders. If you do not have the cash right now, we need a legally binding guarantor, someone with verified assets to sign the primary construction contract. Otherwise, we walk and you are left with a demolition zone." Chloe let out a dramatic, breathless sob. She buried her face in Marcus's chest. You promised me my dream closet, Marcus. You promised me the mirrored ceiling. If they cancel the pink marble order, it will take another 6 months to source it from Milan. You cannot do this to me. Marcus was sweating. I watched a single bead of perspiration roll down the side of his perfectly groomed face. He was completely trapped. He had leveraged my house to get a fraudulent $5 million loan, but that money was currently locked in a digital holding pattern by my own banking executives. He could not access a single penny of it. He was functionally broke, standing in a $5 million mansion he did not own, trying to appease a mistress who was draining his non-existent bank accounts. Marcus looked around the kitchen, pure desperation flashing in his eyes. His gaze landed on Brad. Brad was leaning against the marble island, wearing a designer polo shirt, trying to maintain his arrogant, superior posture despite his obvious hangover. Brother Marcus started, his voice dripping with sudden artificial camaraderie. I need a massive favor, just for a couple of days. Brad blinked, sitting up slightly. What kind of favor? Marcus gestured to the foreman. I need you to sign as the guarantor on this construction contract. It is purely a formality. My new private equity funds are temporarily locked in a standard compliance check. It happens all the time with multi-million-dollar commercial loans. I just need a verified signature to keep the crew working today. The second my wire clears on Tuesday, I will pay the invoice in full. You will not have to spend a single dime. I just need your name on the paper to satisfy their supplier protocol. Brad immediately shifted in his seat. The boastful, arrogant venture capitalist from last night suddenly looked incredibly uncomfortable. The color drained from his face as he stared at the heavy clipboard in the foreman's hands. Signing a $500,000 guarantee was not a joke. Well, Marcus, you know, my capital is heavily tied up in my own aggressive market portfolios right now, Brad stammered, running a nervous hand through his hair. My father's wealth management team gets incredibly strict about me signing personal guarantees on external property developments. It throws off our quarterly risk assessments. Maybe you should just wait until your funds clear. Chloe can survive with a normal bathroom for a few days. Chloe gasped, looking at Brad as if he had just slapped her. Jasmine immediately jumped to her husband's defense. Brad is right, Marcus. It is completely inappropriate to ask him to leverage our family assets for your girlfriend's ridiculous home makeover. You need to handle your own cash flow issues. Marcus looked thoroughly defeated. His grand illusion of limitless wealth was cracking right in front of his new mistress. Chloe began to cry for real this time, loud, heavy sobs that echoed off the high ceilings. She stomped her foot against the expensive tile. I decided it was the perfect moment to step onto the stage. I set my tablet down on the table with a soft, deliberate click. I stood up and walked slowly toward the kitchen island. I kept my posture relaxed, my expression arranged into a mask of quiet, gentle submission. I looked at Marcus, and then I turned my gaze directly to Brad. I made sure my eyes projected nothing but pure, condescending pity. You really should not pressure Brad like this, Marcus, I said, my voice soft, reasonable, and entirely laced with poison. It is completely unfair to put him in this position. Brad looked at me, his eyes narrowing defensively. He hated when I spoke. He hated my very existence. Keep your mouth shut, Maya, Brad spat. Nobody asked for your uneducated opinion. I did not retreat. I took a step closer to the island, folding my hands neatly in front of me. I am just trying to save you from a very public embarrassment, Brad, I replied, my tone dripping with fake maternal concern. Let us be realistic. The bank is going to run a hard corporate credit check on whoever signs that guarantor contract. They are going to look for genuine liquid wealth. I tilted my head, looking at him as if he were a naive child trying to play a grown man's game. With your basic assistant salary at your father's firm, the underwriting software will flag you immediately. The bank will not approve a $500,000 guarantee based on your allowance. You white guys are not always given automatic priority just because you wear an expensive suit and carry your father's last name. The financial world requires actual personal capital. You do not have it, and it is going to be incredibly humiliating when the bank officially rejects your application in front of the construction crew. The kitchen went dead silent. The air grew so thick and tense it felt like it might spontaneously combust. Jasmine let out a sharp, offended gasp. "How dare you speak to my husband that way?" she shrieked, slamming her hand onto the counter. "You have absolutely no idea what kind of power Brad holds." But I was not looking at Jasmine. I was watching Brad. His face turned a deep, violent shade of crimson. The vein in his neck throbbed against his collar. His fragile, unearned ego had just been publicly shredded by a black woman he viewed as a penniless peasant. I had just questioned his masculinity, his financial independence, and his racial privilege all in one devastating, softly spoken sentence. He could not handle it. The sheer arrogance pumping through his veins overrode whatever tiny shred of financial sense he actually possessed. Brad pushed himself off the stool with explosive force. He marched directly up to the foreman, his chest puffed out, breathing heavily through his nose. "Give me the damn pen," Brad commanded, his voice shaking with blind rage. "Brad, wait!" Jasmine warned, suddenly realizing the massive risk her husband was taking. "I said, give me the pen!" Brad roared, snatching the heavy metal pen from the foreman's thick fingers. He yanked the clipboard out of the man's hands. He glared at me, his eyes wide and manic with the desperate need to prove his superiority. "You think I am some low-level assistant, Maya?" Brad snarled, pressing the pen hard against the thick paper. "I manage a portfolio that would make your head spin. I have more liquid assets in my secondary checking account than you will ever see in 3 lifetimes. I am Bradley Sterling Winston. My signature is literally made of gold." He slashed his signature across the bottom line of the guarantor contract with violent, aggressive strokes. He pressed so hard I could hear the paper tearing slightly under the ballpoint tip. He flipped to the second page, initialing the liability waivers without reading a single word. He was entirely consumed by the need to put me in my place. He wanted to show me and Marcus and Chloe that he was the ultimate alpha male in the room. He slammed the clipboard back into the foreman's chest. "There, $500,000 fully guaranteed by my personal estate. Order the pink marble. Order the gold. Order whatever this girl wants." Chloe squealed in absolute delight, launching herself at Brad and hugging him tightly. "Oh my gosh, Brad, you are a literal lifesaver. You are amazing." Marcus looked incredibly relieved, letting out a heavy breath. "Thanks, man. I owe you one. The funds will clear on Tuesday, I promise." Brad straightened his collar, adjusting his expensive watch as he shot me a look of pure, concentrated triumph. He smirked, looking down his nose at me. "Next time you want to talk about real money, Maya, maybe you should learn your place. You are looking at a man who actually owns the city. Now go pack your cheap bags and get out of our sight before the bank comes to repossess this house." I did not argue. I did not defend myself. I just stood there, letting him enjoy his hollow, temporary victory. The foreman cleared his throat, adjusting his yellow hard hat. He pulled the top copy of the contract off the clipboard and folded it neatly. "Thank you for your business, Mr. Winston," the foreman said gruffly. "The materials will be ordered immediately. This debt is now legally binding and fully active." As the foreman turned to leave the kitchen, he walked directly past me. For a fraction of a second, when Marcus, Brad, and Chloe were busy celebrating their brilliant financial maneuver, the foreman paused. He lowered his heavy clipboard, revealing the bold, gold-embossed logo printed at the very top of the construction contract. It was a sleek, geometric mountain peak, the official undeniable crest of Apex Holding Group. The foreman dipped his head in a nearly imperceptible, deeply respectful bow. He looked me directly in the eyes. "Everything is secured, boss," he murmured, his voice so low that only I could hear the absolute loyalty in his tone. "The trap is locked." I looked at the Apex logo on the contract Brad had just signed. Brad Winston, the arrogant, racist parasite who had just mocked my existence, had just legally bound his entire personal estate to my private corporation. He owed me $500,000 payable on demand, with a penalty interest rate he had failed to read. I met the foreman's eyes. I gave him a slow, razor-sharp smile and nodded my head once. Proceed with the demolition, I whispered back. Let them destroy themselves. The bass from the massive rented sound system vibrated through the soles of my shoes, shaking the crystal chandeliers that had somehow survived the week's demolition. Less than 48 hours after Brad blindly signed away his financial future, Chloe decided to throw what she loudly advertised as the social event of the season. She called it a housewarming party, completely ignoring the fact that half the second floor was currently exposed to the studs and wrapped in industrial plastic. To hide the construction zone, Marcus had paid a small fortune to drape the walls in sheer white silk and flood the mansion with magenta uplighting. The sprawling first floor was now crawling with over 100 local social media influencers, reality television hopefuls, and loud hangers-on who drank top-shelf champagne like it was tap water. Ring lights were set up in every corner. Waiters in crisp black uniforms navigated the crowd carrying silver trays piled high with beluga caviar and Wagyu beef blinis. I stood quietly near the edge of the kitchen, watching the grotesque display of stolen wealth. Every single dollar funding this extravagant spectacle was being tracked, categorized, and cataloged by my legal team. The caterers, the lighting crew, the imported DJ spinning tracks in my living room. Marcus was paying for all of it using the fraudulent lines of credit he believed he controlled. He was digging his grave so deep he would never see sunlight again. Maya. The sharp nasal voice cut through the thumping music. I turned to see Beatrice Marcus's mother pushing her way through a group of young women taking selfies by the ice sculpture. Beatrice was wearing a sequined gown that was entirely inappropriate for a house party, her neck heavy with diamonds Marcus had likely purchased for her using my assets. Trailing right behind her was Jasmine, Brad's wife, looking immensely pleased with herself. Beatrice stopped in front of me, looking me up and down with an expression of profound disgust. Her eyes lingered on my simple, unbranded black dress. I am honestly shocked you are still hovering around here, Beatrice said, swirling her champagne glass. Have you absolutely no pride left? A dignified woman would have packed her bags the moment she realized she was entirely unwanted. But I suppose dignity was never something your kind truly understood. Jasmine stepped up beside her mother-in-law, adjusting the strap of her designer clutch. She let out a short, mean laugh. She is probably just trying to steal some food from the catering trays, Beatrice. Brad told me Marcus had to freeze all her little allowances because she was spending out of control. It is pathetic, really. I looked at Jasmine, thinking about her husband. Brad had spent the last 2 days strutting around town bragging about his vast wealth, completely unaware that the $500,000 guarantee he signed was currently routing directly into the accounts of Apex Holding Group. The interest penalties were already accruing. Jasmine was wearing a dress bought with money she no longer truly possessed. I am just observing, Beatrice, I replied, my voice perfectly level and calm. It is fascinating to watch how quickly people celebrate things they do not actually own. Beatrice's face flushed with anger. How dare you speak to me with that tone in my son's house? You have been nothing but a dark cloud hanging over Marcus for 5 years. You dragged him down with your mediocre ambitions and your depressing energy. Look at him now. She gestured grandly toward the center of the room where Marcus was laughing loudly with a group of local minor celebrities, his arm wrapped tightly around Chloe's waist. He is finally with a woman who matches his caliber, Beatrice declared proudly. Chloe understands luxury. She understands status. She has a real future, unlike you. You are just a bitter, jealous footnote in his success story. Jasmine smirked, stepping closer to me. You know, Maya, since you are living here, rent-free, you really should make yourself useful. With a deliberate, highly calculated flick of her wrist, Jasmine tipped her crystal champagne flute forward. The expensive glass slipped from her fingers and crashed onto the marble floor right at my feet. It shattered into dozens of sharp, glittering pieces, splashing sticky champagne across the toes of my shoes. Several influencers nearby gasped and turned their phone cameras toward us, sensing drama. Oh my goodness, I am so incredibly clumsy, Jasmine said, her voice dripping with fake, exaggerated innocence. She looked down at the mess, then back up at me with cold, triumphant eyes. Well, do not just stand there staring like an idiot. Beatrice folded her arms across her chest, a cruel smile stretching her lips. You heard her, Maya. Go find a broom and a mop. Clean this up immediately before one of our important guests steps on it. If you are going to loiter in my son's house like a stray dog, you are going to earn your keep. Get on your hands and knees and clean it up. They waited for me to explode. They waited for me to yell, to cry, or to run away in shame. The cameras were recording. This was supposed to be my ultimate humiliation the moment the discarded broke ex-wife was reduced to playing the maid in front of a live audience. I looked down at the shattered crystal. Then I looked up at Beatrice and Jasmine. I did not frown. I did not scowl. I offered them a serene, perfectly polite smile. Of course, I said softly. I will make sure the mess is handled. I turned and walked calmly toward the kitchen pantry. I could hear Jasmine laughing behind me, high-fiving her mother-in-law, reveling in their perceived victory over me. They thought they had broken my spirit. They had absolutely no idea that their petty high school bullying tactics meant nothing to a woman holding the deed to their destruction. I grabbed a broom and a dustpan, walked back out, and efficiently swept up the broken glass. I did it with the meticulous, unbothered grace of an apex predator, patiently watching its prey wander blindly into a snare. As I disposed of the glass, the music abruptly faded. The heavy bass thump dropped away, replaced by the screech of microphone feedback. I stepped back into the main hallway to see Marcus standing on the mid-landing of the grand staircase. He held a fresh glass of champagne high in the air. A spotlight, likely rented by Chloe's production team, illuminated him perfectly. Chloe stood one step below him, gazing up at him with total adoration, the perfect picture of a gold digger who believed she had finally struck the mother lode. "Can I get everyone's attention, please?" Marcus shouted into the microphone. His voice echoed through the massive foyer. The crowd of influencers cheered, holding up their phones to capture the speech. Marcus beamed, absorbing the attention like a sponge. "Thank you all for coming out tonight to celebrate with us. It has been an incredible year of massive transitions and unprecedented growth. I have been shedding a lot of dead weight lately." He paused, letting the crowd chuckle. Beatrice and Jasmine looked over at me, smirking openly. For a long time I was held back by the past. Marcus continued, his voice dripping with arrogant confidence. I was living in a sterile environment that lacked vision, lacked passion, and lacked true class. But a man knows when it is time to upgrade his life. He knows when to cut his losses and claim the empire he deserves. He reached down and pulled Chloe up to stand beside him. She giggled, resting her head on his shoulder. This woman right here, my beautiful Chloe, brought the light back into my world. She showed me what real luxury looks like. So tonight, we are not just celebrating a housewarming. We are celebrating the launch of our new dynasty. This house, this incredible estate, is just the beginning. It is the home of our future. To Chloe and to the Sterling Empire. The crowd erupted in loud cheers and applause. Marcus smiled triumphantly, bringing the crystal champagne flute to his lips to drink to his own magnificent delusion. Right as the glass touched his mouth, a sharp, loud pop echoed from the electrical room down the hall. Instantly, the mansion plunged into pitch-black darkness. The heavy magenta uplighting died. The brilliant ring lights cut out simultaneously. The emergency backup generators, which I had personally instructed my security team to disable remotely 10 minutes ago, remained silent. The entire $5 million estate was completely, suffocatingly dark. A chorus of confused gasps and startled shrieks erupted from the crowd. "What is going on?" Chloe yelled from the staircase, her voice laced with sudden panic. "Marcus, fix the lights. My live stream just dropped. Hold on, everybody, just stay calm," Marcus shouted into the dead microphone, his voice barely carrying over the noise of the panicked guests. "It is just a blown breaker from the catering equipment." The crowd continued to murmur, the darkness thick and disorienting. People began fumbling for their phones to use as flashlights, creating erratic, sweeping beams of white light across the walls. Then, cutting through the murmurs and the confusion, came a sound from the front of the house. Knock, knock, knock. It was slow, deliberate, incredibly heavy. The sound of a solid, weighted object striking the massive mahogany double doors at the main entrance. It echoed through the silent, dark foyer like the beating of a slow drum. Knock, knock, knock. The guests nearest to the entryway fell completely silent. The chatter died away. "Marcus, someone is at the door!" Beatrice called out, her voice trembling slightly in the dark. I stood in the shadows by the kitchen archway, perfectly still. I did not reach for my phone flashlight. I let the darkness wash over me. The trap had officially snapped shut. My guests had finally arrived. "Let us get to work," I whispered. The heavy oak doors swung open before Marcus could even take a step toward the foyer. A gust of crisp evening wind swept through the entrance, rustling the sheer white silk draped over the construction zones. At that exact moment, the emergency generators I had instructed my security team to hold back finally roared to life. Warm, brilliant light flooded the $5 million estate, once more blinding the guests for a split second. Standing perfectly centered in the grand entryway was a man who instantly commanded the attention of every person in the room. It was Jordan. He did not look like a contractor, an electrician, or a panicked caterer. He was an African-American man possessing an imposing athletic build, but his physical presence was entirely eclipsed by his immaculate attire. He wore a bespoke charcoal gray Tom Ford suit, tailored to absolute perfection, a garment that easily cost upward of $10,000. The fabric caught the light, showcasing a subtle, expensive sheen. A crisp white shirt, a conservative silk tie, and a pair of polished Oxfords completed the look. In his right hand, he carried a slim, locked leather briefcase. His face was a mask of cold, professional stoicism. The influencers lowered their phones. The reality television hopefuls stopped whispering. A heavy, uncomfortable silence blanketed the extravagant housewarming party. They were looking at a man who radiated authentic, undeniable power, a stark contrast to the cheap, flashy illusion Marcus and Chloe had spent the evening trying to project. Marcus, however, was completely blinded by his own bruised ego. The sudden power outage had embarrassed him in front of his new high society friends, and he desperately needed a target to reassert his dominance. He stormed down the stairs, his face flushed red with irritation, aggressively pointing his champagne flute at the entrance. "Hey, Marcus," barked his voice loud and echoing through the marble foyer. "Who the hell do you think you are, just walking into my house? The service entrance is around the back. If you are here to fix the breaker, you need to go around through the mudroom. You do not just parade through the front door during a private VIP event." Jordan did not blink. He did not shift his weight. He stood perfectly still, his eyes scanning the crowd with quiet calculation, searching for me. He treated Marcus with the exact same level of attention one might give a buzzing gnat. Marcus's face twisted into an ugly snarl. He stepped closer, invading Jordan's personal space, trying to use his height to intimidate him. "Are you deaf?" I said. "The service entrance is out back. I do not care if the catering company sent you with more champagne or if you are lost looking for the electrical panel. You are tracking dirt onto my imported rugs. Get out of the foyer right now before I have security throw you off the property." Chloe giggled nervously from the staircase, clearly thrilled by Marcus's aggressive posturing. Beatrice nodded in approval, her diamonds catching the light as she watched her son play the role of the undisputed master of the house. When Jordan remained completely silent, simply adjusting his grip on the leather briefcase, Brad decided it was time to join the performance. He swaggered over from the kitchen archway, his chest puffed out, eager to prove his worth, after the humiliating financial guarantee he had been tricked into signing earlier that day. Brad stood shoulder to shoulder with Marcus, crossing his arms and looking Jordan up and down with an expression of profound, sickening superiority. "You heard the man," Brad sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "This is an exclusive neighborhood buddy. We do not tolerate uninvited guests wandering in off the street. Let me guess, you got lost on your delivery route. Or maybe you saw the lights and thought you could sneak in and grab something valuable." A few gasps rippled through the crowd. The influencers exchanged wide-eyed glances. The racist undertone of Brad's words was not subtle. It was a vile, calculated attempt to diminish a successful black man by reducing him to a stereotype, to paint him as a threat or a servant simply because he had walked into a wealthy, predominantly white space. "Look at him!" Brad continued, laughing cruelly as he glanced back at his wife Jasmine. "He put on a nice little suit to try and blend in. Very convincing. But you are way out of your depth here. Take your little briefcase and walk back out that door before I call the local police. They love dealing with trespassers in this zip code. They will have you in handcuffs before you can even explain which delivery app you work for. The sheer audacity of their ignorance was staggering. Brad, a man drowning in a $500,000 debt to my company, and Marcus, a man leveraging stolen funds, were attempting to belittle the chief legal counsel of an international holding group. They thought their proximity to a stolen mansion gave them unlimited power. I stepped out from the shadows of the kitchen archway, my black dress blending seamlessly with the dark mahogany trim of the hallway. I did not speak. I simply watched the masterful execution of absolute discipline. Jordan did not raise his voice. He did not defend himself against Brad's disgusting accusations. He did not bother correcting Marcus's assumption about the service entrance. He simply turned his head, his sharp eyes finally locking onto mine across the massive expanse of the living room. The moment Jordan saw me, the entire dynamic of the room shifted. He ignored Marcus completely. He stepped forward, his polished Oxfords clicking against the marble. "Hey, I am talking to you!" Marcus yelled, reaching out to grab Jordan's shoulder. Before Marcus's fingers could even brush the fabric of the $10,000 suit, Jordan moved. He did not strike Marcus. He simply kept walking with such immense, unyielding physical purpose that Marcus was forced to stumble backward to avoid a collision. Brad scrambled out of the way, his arrogant smirk vanishing as the sheer kinetic force of Jordan's advance physically parted the two men like the Red Sea. The crowd of influencers pressed themselves against the silk-draped walls, holding their collective breath. The upbeat house music remained dead. The only sound in the entire mansion was the steady, rhythmic click of Jordan's shoes as he walked past the ice sculptures, past the piles of caviar, past the trembling, arrogant men who claimed to own the world. He walked directly toward me. Marcus spun around his face, purple with outrage. "Hey, security! Grab that guy! Get him away from my guests!" Jordan stopped exactly 3 feet in front of me. He snapped his heels together. The chaotic noise of the party, Marcus's screaming, Brad's sputtering indignance, all of it seemed to fade into a vacuum of total silence. With slow, deliberate precision, Jordan lowered his leather briefcase to his side. He placed his right hand flat against his stomach, right over the button of his suit jacket. And then, in front of 100 stunned guests, in front of Beatrice, Jasmine, Brad, and Marcus, Jordan bowed. It was not a polite nod. It was a deep, formal, flawless 90-degree bow, a gesture of absolute, undeniable reverence and submission. He held the position for 3 full seconds, establishing a hierarchy so clear and so devastating that the air was sucked right out of the room. He straightened up, his face devoid of anything but professional respect. His powerful voice, smooth and resonant, carried effortlessly across the dead-silent living room, ensuring every single person present heard his exact words. "Good evening," Chairman Washington Jordan said, the title echoing off the high ceilings like a gavel striking wood. "I apologize for the intrusion. The purge files are ready for your final authorization." The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavy, suffocating, and beautifully destructive. On the staircase, Chloe's champagne glass slipped through her fingers. It shattered against the wooden steps, but she did not even flinch. Her face had gone completely slack, her jaw hanging open as the blood drained from her cheeks. The confident, mocking smile she had worn all evening was frozen, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. Marcus stood frozen near the entryway, his hand still suspended in the air from where he had tried to grab Jordan's shoulder. His brain was desperately trying to process the words he had just heard. Chairman, Washington, the name of the holding company on the loan documents. The name of the corporate entity that actually owned the $5 million estate he was currently standing in. Brad backed up until his spine hit the marble island, his eyes darting frantically between me and the impeccably dressed lawyer he had just threatened with police action. The realization of what he had signed yesterday, the $500,000 guarantee to Apex Holding Group, suddenly slammed into him with the force of a freight train. I looked at Jordan, offering him a slow, satisfied smile. "Thank you, Jordan. You are exactly on time." I turned my gaze away from my chief counsel and let my eyes sweep across the room. I looked at Beatrice, whose mouth was opening and closing like a suffocating fish. I looked at Jasmine, who had instinctively grabbed her husband's arm in panic. I looked at Chloe, trembling on the stairs. And finally, I looked at Marcus, the man who had frozen my decoy checking account, and told me I was a penniless failure. I stepped forward, taking the locked leather briefcase from Jordan's hands. I placed it gently on the edge of the dining table. The heavy metallic click of the latches opening sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. "Let us get to work," I whispered. Marcus slammed both hands down onto the polished surface of the dining table. The impact rattled the crystal glassware, but neither Jordan nor I flinched. The color had rushed back into Marcus's face, transforming his initial pale shock into a violent, blotchy red. "This is some kind of sick joke," Marcus barked, his eyes darting frantically between me and Jordan. "I do not know how much you paid this actor, Maya, but you are completely out of your mind. I am the sole owner of this property. I have the mortgage documents in my safe upstairs. I am the CEO of my own firm. You are nothing but an unemployed housewife trying to pull a pathetic stunt in front of my friends." Beatrice rushed forward, her heavy diamond necklace swinging against her chest. She grabbed her son's arm, casting a venomous glare in my direction. "Call the police, Marcus. Have this man arrested for trespassing and have her thrown out into the street. She is clearly having a psychotic break. This is exactly what happens when you marry beneath your station. I warned you about her from day one. I ignored my former mother-in-law completely." I nodded to Jordan. Jordan reached into the meticulously organized compartments of his briefcase. His movements were smooth, practiced, and devastatingly efficient. He withdrew a thick stack of legal documents bound by a heavy blue seal. He did not hand them to Marcus. Instead, he placed them flat on the table, turning the documents so they faced my furious husband. "I am not an actor, Mr. Sterling," Jordan stated, his voice carrying the calm, absolute authority of a man who held all the cards. "I am the senior legal counsel for Apex Holding Group, and you do not have any mortgage documents in your safe upstairs. What you have are outdated copies of a discharged loan." Jordan tapped a manicured finger against the top page of the stack. "This is the official registered deed to this estate. I pulled the municipal records 30 minutes prior to my arrival. This property in its entirety belongs to Apex Holding Group." Marcus let out a loud braying laugh. It sounded hollow and desperate. "Apex Holding Group is my company. I set up that blind trust 4 years ago to protect my assets. You are standing in my house holding my deed, trying to tell me you work for my ex-wife. You are both going to jail for fraud." I stepped up to the table, resting my fingertips lightly against the edge. "It is truly remarkable how selective your memory is, Marcus. Do you remember the lawsuit 4 years ago? The one where your former business partner accused you of gross financial malpractice?" Marcus stiffened. The arrogant sneer on his face faltered for a fraction of a second. The influencers surrounding us leaned in closer. Phones were still recording. The silence in the room was absolute, every single person hanging on to my every word. "You were terrified," I continued, keeping my voice low and lethal. "You were facing a judgment that would have completely wiped out your personal accounts, liquidated your stock portfolios, and forced the sale of this very house. You paced the floors for weeks, crying about losing your precious status. You begged me to help you find a way to hide your biggest asset." "That was a strategic asset reallocation," Marcus hissed, looking nervously at the crowd. "It was standard wealth protection." "It was cowardice," I corrected him sharply. "And you were so blinded by your panic that you did not bother to read the paperwork I prepared for you. I told you I knew a brilliant corporate attorney who could set up a blind trust. I told you we could transfer the title of the house to a corporate entity to shield it from the lawsuit. You were so eager to hide your money that you signed the quitclaim deed the very next morning. You transferred absolute ownership of this $5 million estate to Apex Holding Group." Marcus puffed out his chest. "Exactly. My trust. My company." Jordan smoothly flipped to the second page of the document. He pointed to a specific paragraph highlighted in bold ink. Apex Holding Group was incorporated in the state of Delaware 5 years ago. Jordan read aloud, his voice projecting across the silent room. The corporate charter lists one sole founder, one principal shareholder, and one absolute beneficiary. Maya Washington. The words landed like physical blows. Marcus stopped breathing. His eyes widened to impossible proportions as he stared down at the bold printed name, my maiden name. He leaned over the table, his hands trembling as he read the paragraph again, and then a third time. "You never owned Apex, Marcus," I said softly. "I formed that holding company a year before your lawsuit even happened, using my own private investments. When you signed that quitclaim deed, you did not transfer the house into a protective shell. You handed the keys, the equity, and the absolute legal ownership directly to me." "No!" Marcus gasped, stumbling backward. His heel caught the edge of the expensive rug and he nearly lost his balance. "No, that is illegal. That is trickery. You cannot do that. I paid the mortgage on this place. I paid the property taxes." "You paid rent," I corrected him, my smile widening into a predatory grin. "For 4 years you deposited money into an Apex corporate account, believing you were paying down your own mortgage. In reality, you were simply paying me lease installments. And since you never bothered to check the corporate registry, you never realized you were funding my investment portfolio." From the staircase, a sharp, ragged sound broke the silence. Chloe had dropped to her knees on the wooden steps. She was staring at Marcus as if he had just transformed into a monster. The illusion of her billionaire savior had just evaporated into thin air. Chloe screamed, her voice cracking with pure hysteria. "What is she talking about? Tell me she is lying. Tell me you own this house. You promised me this house. You promised me the renovations." Brad pushed his way forward, his face completely devoid of color. He looked like he was about to vomit. "Wait a minute," Brad stammered, looking frantically from the documents to Jordan and then to me. "The construction contract, the guarantee I signed this morning, it was issued by Apex." I turned my gaze to Brad. I let my eyes sweep over his designer suit, dismantling his unearned pride piece by piece. "That is correct, Brad. You guaranteed a $500,000 construction debt to my corporation. Because Marcus does not own this house, he had absolutely no legal right to authorize demolition or order custom renovations. He committed massive property damage today. The moment you signed that contract, you assumed full financial liability for fixing the destruction he caused." Jasmine let out a piercing shriek. "Brad, what did you do? You signed away our money to her." "I did not know," Brad yelled back, his voice cracking. "Marcus told me it was a formality. He said his venture capital funds were just frozen." "Speaking of those funds," Jordan interrupted smoothly, snapping his briefcase shut. "Mr. Sterling, the $5 million commercial loan you attempted to secure against this property yesterday has been flagged for federal review." Marcus clutched his chest, looking like he was about to have a heart attack. "Since you do not own the property you offered as collateral, your loan application constitutes severe bank fraud." Jordan continued, his tone entirely conversational, as if he were discussing the weather. "Furthermore, the banking executives who froze your accounts this morning were acting on direct orders from Chairman Washington. She flagged your supplementary cards for unauthorized usage. You have zero access to the capital you have been spending for the last 2 days." The sheer scale of the devastation was finally sinking in. Marcus was not just broke. He was facing federal prison. Brad was on the hook for $500,000. Chloe was standing in a gutted house with a man who could not even afford to buy her a fast food burger. Beatrice, however, was too stubborn and too arrogant to accept defeat. She marched right up to me, her face contorted with pure, unadulterated rage. She raised her hand, pointing a trembling finger an inch from my nose. "You vindictive, manipulative wretch!" Beatrice spat, her voice echoing through the massive foyer. "You think you are so clever. You think a piece of paper changes anything. Marcus is your husband. You are legally married. Under state law, this is marital property. Whatever you own, he owns. You cannot just steal a house from your own husband. He is entitled to half of everything you have. We are going to drag you through divorce court for years. We will drain every single account you have hidden. Marcus grabbed onto his mother's words like a drowning man grabbing a life preserver. Yes, he shouted, his confidence surging back in a pathetic, desperate wave. Yes, you are my wife. This is community property. You just proved that you have millions hidden away. My lawyers are going to take you to the cleaners, Maya. You are going to pay me alimony for the rest of your miserable life. I did not even have to look at Jordan. He was already moving. Jordan reached into his breast pocket and retrieved a single folded sheet of thick ivory paper. He did not place this one on the table. He held it up, holding it perfectly still, so Marcus and Beatrice could see the heavy notary stamps covering the bottom half. No, Sir Jordan, said, his voice dropping an octave, carrying the final brutal weight of a death sentence. You are entirely incorrect. Marcus stared at the paper. What is that? This is your prenuptial agreement, Jordan stated. The one you presented to my client 5 years ago. The one you insisted she sign to protect your banking assets because you believed she was a gold digger. I stepped forward, closing the distance between Marcus and myself. I looked deeply into his panicked, bloodshot eyes. Do you remember the terms you demanded, Marcus? I asked, my voice a soft, venomous purr. You wanted to make absolutely sure I could never touch a dime of your money. Jordan cleared his throat and read directly from the highlighted text. Clause 4, Section B. Any and all assets, properties or capital held within private trusts, holding companies or corporate entities established prior to or during the marriage, remain the sole exclusive property of the original founder. They are strictly excluded from all marital property divisions. Jordan lowered the paper. He looked at Marcus with an expression of pure, unadulterated pity. You drafted the very document that protects her wealth from you. You have zero legal claim to Apex Holding Group. You have zero legal claim to this estate. The silence returned heavier and darker than before. Marcus looked completely broken. His shoulders slumped. The arrogant, powerful man who had belittled me for 5 years had completely vanished, replaced by a terrified, penniless fraud. Therefore, Jordan concluded, slipping the prenup back into his pocket, since you have no ownership, no lease agreement, and no marital claim to this property, your presence here is no longer authorized. You are currently an illegal squatter, and my client wants you out. The absolute finality of Jordan's words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. For a long moment, nobody moved. The influencers, the hired staff, and the hangers-on were all entirely captivated by the brutal, high-definition reality playing out before them. Then Chloe shattered the silence. No! She shrieked, the sound tearing from her throat with a raw, panicked intensity. She scrambled down the remaining stairs, her expensive heels catching on the wood, nearly sending her tumbling to the floor. She grabbed Marcus by the lapels of his custom suit, shaking him violently. Tell them they are lying, Marcus. Tell them. You showed me your portfolio. You are a billionaire. You promised me this house. You promised me the pink marble. Marcus could not even look at her. His eyes were wide vacant and utterly terrified as they remained locked on the prenuptial agreement in Jordan's hand. The reality of his total ruin had paralyzed his vocal cords. He had spent the last 2 days living a magnificent lie, funding a lavish lifestyle on fraudulent credit, confident he had millions in equity to fall back on. Now he was a man standing in a $5 million mansion with absolutely nothing to his name but the clothes on his back and impending federal charges. I turned my back on Marcus's pathetic, silent crumbling. I had another debt to collect. I walked smoothly across the marble floor, my footsteps echoing in the cavernous, quiet room. I bypassed the shattered remains of Jasmine's champagne glass and stepped directly up to the kitchen island. Sitting perfectly centered on the marble countertop was the heavy metal clipboard the construction foreman had left behind earlier that morning. I picked it up. The gold-embossed logo of the mountain peak caught the bright light of the emergency generators. I turned slowly to face Brad. He was standing next to his wife. His previous arrogant swagger entirely vanished. He looked like a man who had just stepped onto a landmine and heard the click of the trigger. His face was a sickly shade of gray, a thin sheen of sweat breaking out across his forehead. Jasmine was gripping his arm, her manicured nails digging into his sleeve, her eyes darting frantically between me and the clipboard in my hands. You know, Brad, I said, my voice perfectly calm and conversational, cutting through Chloe's continuing hysterics. You were so incredibly eager to play the big shot this morning. You were so desperate to put me in my place to prove that your signature was made of gold that you completely forgot the cardinal rule of high finance. You never ever sign a binding legal document without reading the fine print. Brad swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He tried to muster a fraction of his usual bravado, but his voice came out thin and reedy. That was a standard supplier guarantee. It was a formality for Marcus to get his construction materials. It has absolutely nothing to do with whatever sick corporate game you are playing right now. I smiled. It was a slow, razor-sharp smile that made Jasmine flinch. It has absolutely everything to do with this. Brad, I replied, holding up the clipboard. Let us review the facts. Marcus ordered a demolition crew to gut the master suite of a $5 million estate. He authorized the removal of load-bearing walls, the tearing out of custom plumbing, and the destruction of imported hardwood floors. I took a slow step toward him, letting the weight of my words settle over the room. Because Marcus does not own this property, and never did, he had absolutely no legal authority to order those renovations. In the eyes of the law, that is not a home improvement project. That is the willful destruction of private property. It is vandalism on a massive structural scale. Brad blinked, a look of genuine confusion crossing his pale face. But what does that have to do with me? I just signed the guarantee for the marble. Jordan stepped forward, moving with the silent, predatory grace of a man who destroyed empires for a living. He adjusted his silk tie and looked directly at Brad. The construction firm currently tearing apart the second floor is a wholly owned subsidiary of Apex Holding Group. Jordan stated, his voice ringing with absolute clinical authority. When the contractors demanded a $500,000 deposit to secure the custom materials, Mr. Sterling could not provide the funds. You chose to step in. You signed your name as the primary financial guarantor to secure that debt. Jordan tilted his head, pinning Brad with a stare so cold it could have frozen water. By signing that document, Mr. Winston, you legally bound your entire personal estate to Apex Holding Group. You assumed full financial liability, not just for the materials, but for the immediate repair and restoration of the property, damage your brother-in-law illegally authorized. Jasmine let out a sharp, breathless gasp. She yanked hard on Brad's arm, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. Brad, what did you sign? Tell me you did not pledge our accounts. Tell me you did not risk my trust fund for his stupid girlfriend's closet. Brad was trembling. Actual visible tremors were racking his body. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a sudden suffocating terror. You set me up, he whispered. You brought those contractors in to trap me. You trapped yourself, Brad, I replied, my tone devoid of any sympathy. You could have walked away. You could have told Marcus to wait for his imaginary funds to clear. But your fragile, toxic ego simply could not handle being questioned by a black woman. You were so blinded by your own arrogance, so desperate to prove your superiority, that you blindly surrendered your entire financial future directly into my hands. I turned my gaze to Jasmine, who was currently hyperventilating, staring at her husband as if he were a stranger. Oh, he pledged everything, Jasmine, I said, delivering the final devastating blow. The venture capital portfolio he claims to manage, your secondary checking accounts, the equity in your home. All of it is now legally encumbered to Apex Holding Group until the $500,000 debt, plus the aggressive penalty interest rates he failed to read, is paid in full in cash. I hope you kept the receipt for that designer clutch you are holding. You are going to need the refund just to keep your electricity turned on next month. Beatrice let out a loud, wailing sob from the center of the room. Her knees finally buckled and she collapsed onto one of the expensive white sofas, burying her face in her hands. The entire grand illusion of the Sterling family dominance had been systematically dismantled and incinerated in less than 10 minutes. Brad stood paralyzed against the marble counter. The arrogant venture capitalist, the man who had looked down his nose at me for years, was entirely ruined. His father's wealth management firm would fire him the second they discovered he had leveraged family assets for a fraudulent construction loan. He had lost everything, all because he needed to feel like the smartest man in the room. The shock on Brad's face slowly morphed. The pale, terrified realization burned away, replaced by a dark, violent, and uncontrollable rage. His breathing grew heavy, his chest heaving under his designer polo shirt. His eyes snapped away from me and locked onto the man standing by the staircase. Marcus was still staring blankly at Jordan, completely disconnected from reality, trapped in his own nightmare of impending federal prison time. Brad let out a sound that was half scream, half roar. He pushed off the marble island with explosive force, shoving Jasmine aside so violently she nearly fell. He charged across the foyer, his heavy shoes stomping against the imported rugs. Before Marcus could even turn his head to see what was coming, Brad lunged at him. He grabbed Marcus by the collar of his custom-tailored suit, his knuckles turning white with the force of his grip. With a brutal physical surge of pure anger, Brad slammed Marcus backward. Marcus's spine hit the heavy wooden banister of the grand staircase with a sickening thud. The crowd of influencers shrieked, scattering backward like frightened birds. Chloe scrambled up the stairs on her hands and knees, desperately trying to get away from the violence. "You lied to me," Brad roared, spit flying from his lips as he shook Marcus like a rag doll. "You told me this house was yours. You told me your funds were just tied up in a compliance check. You dragged me into your pathetic fraud and you ruined my life." Marcus gagged his hands, flying up to try and pry Brad's fingers off his throat. "Brad, stop. I did not know. I swear I thought the trust protected me. I thought the money was coming." "You set me up to be slaughtered," Brad screamed, slamming Marcus against the banister a second time. The expensive fabric of Marcus's jacket ripped under the strain. "I am going to lose my firm. I am going to lose everything because of your stupid, arrogant lies. I will kill you, Marcus. I swear to God I will kill you right here." The sound of tearing fabric ripped through the tense air as Brad hoisted Marcus by the lapels of his ruined custom jacket. Marcus scrambled uselessly, the heels of his expensive Italian loafers slipping on the slick marble floor. His face was contorted in a mask of pure terror, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps as Brad pinned him against the heavy wooden banister of the grand staircase. Brad was no longer the smug, polished venture capitalist who had mocked my existence mere minutes ago. He was a cornered animal, fully aware that the jaws of a financial trap had just snapped shut around his neck. His chest heaved. The veins in his forehead throbbed with a violent, pulsating rhythm. He raised his fist, entirely prepared to beat Marcus senseless right there in the foyer. "Brad, stop it!" Jasmine shrieked, launching herself forward. She grabbed her husband's raised arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his sleeve. "Are you insane? Look around you. Everyone has their phones out. You are going to go to jail for assault." "I am already going to jail, Jasmine," Brad roared violently, shrugging her off. He did not release his death grip on Marcus's collar. He pointed a trembling, accusatory finger directly into Marcus's face. "This lying parasite just handed my entire career, my trust fund, and our entire financial portfolio over to an aggressive corporate holding company. He made me sign a $500,000 guarantee for a house he does not even own." "It was a mistake," Marcus choked out, his hands clawing weakly at Brad's wrists. "I did not know she was the principal beneficiary of the trust. I thought the asset was protected. I thought I still had the equity." Beatrice rushed forward, her sequined gown glittering under the harsh glare of the emergency lights. She grabbed Brad by the shoulder, desperately trying to pull him away from her precious son. "Let him go, Bradley. This is a private family matter. We can fix this. We will hire our own lawyers. We will sue her for fraud. Just let him go before you make things worse." "Make things worse?" Brad laughed, a harsh, manic sound that bordered on genuine hysteria. He released Marcus with a sudden, violent shove. Marcus crumpled to the floor, gasping for air, clutching his bruised throat. Brad turned to face his mother-in-law, his eyes wild and completely unhinged. "You have absolutely no idea what your idiot son has done, Beatrice. You think this is just about a $500,000 construction contract? You think this is just about some ripped-up floorboards and some pink Italian marble?" Jasmine backed away from her husband, her hands covering her mouth. The 100 or so influencers and party guests stood frozen, their phone cameras capturing every single second of the spectacular implosion of the Sterling family. The live streams were rolling. Thousands of people across the city were currently tuning in to watch the elite tear each other apart. Brad was beyond reasoning. The primal instinct of self-preservation completely overrode his upper-class decorum. He turned to the crowd, pointing frantically at Marcus, who was still coughing on the marble tiles. "He is a criminal!" Brad shouted at the top of his lungs, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "He told me he owned this estate free and clear. He brought me official appraisal documents last week proving this property was worth over $5 million. He used those documents to secure a massive commercial loan." Marcus's head snapped up. His eyes widened in absolute paralyzing horror. "Brad, shut your mouth. Shut up right now." "I will not shut up," Brad screamed back, pacing back and forth in front of the staircase. "You are not dragging me down with you. I want everyone to hear this. I want it on the record." Marcus forged the deed to this house. He took a forged deed and a fake appraisal to a private investment fund in New York. He leveraged a property he does not even own to secure a $15 million corporate loan. A collective deafening gasp rippled through the crowd. Even the hired waiters stopped in their tracks, staring at the man on the floor. $15 million. It was a number so large it immediately elevated the situation from a messy domestic dispute to a severe federal crime. Beatrice let out a high-pitched wail, burying her face in her hands. Jasmine collapsed against the kitchen island, her legs finally giving out as the sheer magnitude of the impending scandal washed over her. Brad was sweating profusely, pacing like a caged tiger, airing every single dirty secret they had buried. "He told me the $15 million was approved." Brad continued, his voice cracking with panic. "He said the funds were sitting in a holding account waiting for final clearance on Tuesday. He said we were going to use that cash to quietly bail out our failing shell company in the Cayman Islands. He promised me a $3 million cut just for helping him facilitate the transfer. That is the only reason I signed the construction guarantee today. He told me he was liquid. He told me he was a millionaire. He is a fraud. He committed federal bank fraud, and he used me to do it." Chloe, still huddled on the stairs, let out a piercing scream. She scrambled backward, putting as much distance between herself and Marcus as physically possible. "You lied to me," she sobbed, mascara running down her cheeks in thick black streams. "You are broke. You are going to federal prison. You are a complete fake." Marcus curled into a ball on the floor, pressing his hands over his ears. He looked like a frightened child. The grand, powerful CEO, the man who had demanded total submission from everyone around him, was utterly destroyed. His own arrogance, his own greed, and his own desperate need to impress a young mistress had driven him to commit a crime so reckless it defied basic logic. He had handed me the weapon. Brad had just pulled the trigger. I stood perfectly still, letting the heavy, suffocating silence fall over the room once again. The only sound was the harsh, ragged breathing of the two men who had spent years trying to make me feel worthless. I raised my hands, clap, clap, clap. The slow, deliberate sound of my applause cut through the tension like a physical blade. Every single phone camera pivoted away from Brad and locked instantly onto me. I stepped out of the shadows, walking slowly toward the center of the foyer. Jordan flanked me on my right, his posture immaculate, holding the open leather briefcase like a shield of absolute authority. I stopped a few feet away from where Marcus was cowering on the floor. I looked down at him, my expression completely devoid of mercy. "That was a truly spectacular performance, Brad," I said, keeping my voice smooth and perfectly modulated. I tilted my head, looking over at the sweating venture capitalist. "I must thank you for your honesty. Confessing to a conspiracy to commit federal bank fraud and international money laundering in front of a live broadcasting audience saves my legal team a tremendous amount of discovery work. Your cooperation is deeply appreciated." Brad stared at me, his chest heaving. "I did not know the deed was forged," he stammered defensively. "I am a victim here, Maya. He lied to me. He told me the investment fund verified the collateral." I turned my attention back to Marcus. He slowly lifted his head, looking up at me with eyes full of desperate, begging terror. He knew it was over. He knew he had lost everything. But he did not yet realize the true depth of the grave he had dug for himself. "You always were a terrible businessman, Marcus," I said softly. "You always focused on the flashy presentation while completely ignoring the fundamental details." You were so desperate to secure that $15 million to save your pathetic offshore accounts that you did not even bother to properly research the private investment fund you were borrowing from. I snapped my fingers. Jordan immediately reached into the leather briefcase. He pulled out a thick, legal-bound contract featuring a familiar gold-embossed Mountain Peak logo at the top of the page. He handed the document to me. I held the contract up so the emergency lights illuminated the bold text. You went to Vanguard Pinnacle Investments in New York, I stated, my voice echoing clearly across the dead silent room. You presented them with a forged deed to a property you surrendered 4 years ago. You signed federal loan documents pledging this estate as collateral. You genuinely believed you had outsmarted the system. Marcus swallowed hard, his eyes locked onto the contract in my hands. How do you have that? He whispered, his voice trembling. That is a confidential corporate loan agreement. I smiled. It was the coldest, most terrifying smile I had ever allowed myself to show. Because Marcus Vanguard Pinnacle Investments is not an independent firm, I replied. It is a subsidiary acquisition. It is entirely owned, operated, and managed by Apex Holding Group. The words struck him with physical force. Marcus gasped, his hands flying to his mouth as the ultimate devastating reality crushed whatever was left of his sanity. I took a step closer, towering over him, enjoying the absolute suffocating terror radiating from his body. You did not trick a random bank, Marcus, I whispered, ensuring every camera recorded the final lethal blow. You forged documents to secure a $15 million loan from my own investment portfolio. You pledged my own house to me as collateral for cash you intended to steal. Congratulations, Marcus. You just committed federal bank fraud against your own wife. The sheer gravity of Brad's confession hit the room like a physical shockwave. Beatrice let out a strangled, breathless gasp. Her knees finally gave out completely. She clutched the heavy diamond necklace at her throat and collapsed backward onto the white silk sofa, her face an ashen, sickly gray. She was hyperventilating, her chest heaving as she struggled for air. The grand, untouchable matriarch of the Sterling family was instantly reduced to a trembling, broken shell, completely unable to process the absolute destruction of her empire. Jasmine did not rush to comfort her mother-in-law. Instead, she turned on Brad with a feral, ear-piercing shriek. She launched herself at her husband, her fists flying, striking him repeatedly in the chest and shoulders. "You ruined us!" Jasmine screamed, her voice cracking with pure hysteria. "You arrogant, stupid man! You signed away everything we have. My trust fund is gone. We are completely bankrupt because you wanted to show off." Brad did not even try to defend himself. He just stood there absorbing the blows, staring blankly at the marble floor as his world entirely disintegrated. On the staircase, the reality of the situation finally pierced through Chloe's panic. She looked at Marcus, who was still cowering on the tiles, trembling under the weight of his impending federal charges. The illusion of her billionaire savior was dead. He was not a ticket to high society. He was a penniless fraud about to be locked in a federal penitentiary. Chloe's expression rapidly morphed from terror to absolute venomous disgust. She marched down the remaining steps and stood over him. Marcus looked up, a pathetic, desperate glimmer of hope in his eyes. He reached a shaking hand out toward her. Chloe responded by swinging her arm and slapping him across the face with everything she had. The sharp crack echoed through the foyer, momentarily silencing Jasmine's screaming. "You disgusting broke liar!" Chloe spat, her face twisted in pure revulsion. "You played me. You let me plan a wedding with money you did not even have. You are a poor, pathetic criminal. The engagement is officially over. Do not ever speak to me again." She grabbed the hem of her expensive designer gown and spun around, desperate to escape the sinking ship. She shoved past a group of stunned influencers, making a frantic beeline for the front doors. She wanted nothing to do with the Sterling family ruin. She did not make it past the entryway. Jordan stepped smoothly into her path, his broad, tailored shoulders completely blocking the exit. Chloe let out an indignant huff, trying to push past his imposing frame. "Get out of my way," she snapped. Jordan did not move a single inch. He looked down at her with a cold, unyielding stare. "Excuse me, Miss Chloe," Jordan said, his voice dropping into a register of absolute terrifying calm. "You are entirely free to leave this property." However, the 5-carat diamond engagement ring on your finger, the Cartier necklace around your throat, the couture gown you are currently wearing, and the keys to the Mercedes parked in the driveway were all purchased using funds from a marital account that my client has officially sealed and reclaimed for fraud. Jordan folded his hands neatly in front of him. Those items are the legal property of Apex Holding Group, and they will not be leaving this estate. I must ask you to remove all of them right here, right now, before you step off these premises. Chloe froze, her eyes widening in pure horror as the entire crowd of influencers simultaneously aimed their phone cameras directly at her. The absolute magnitude of that statement fractured whatever remained of the Sterling family's fabricated reality. Marcus slumped against the staircase, his chest heaving as he gasped for air, his mind completely broken by the inescapable trap he had built for himself. He was paralyzed, staring at the floor as the weight of $15 million in fraudulent debt crushed the breath out of his lungs. But it was Beatrice who finally shattered. The imposing diamond-draped matriarch who had spent the last 5 years making my life a living hell suddenly let out a gut-wrenching sob. She slid off the white silk sofa, her knees hitting the imported hardwood floor with a heavy thud. She did not just fall, she crawled. The woman who had endlessly mocked my upbringing, who had insisted I was nothing more than dirt on her designer shoes, dragged her expensive gown across the marble foyer, directly toward me. Her heavy jewelry clanked against the floor, a pathetic soundtrack to her total humiliation. She threw her arms around my legs, her tears soaking into the dark fabric of my dress. She buried her face against my knees, abandoning every ounce of dignity she claimed to possess. "Maya, please," Beatrice wailed, her voice stripped of all its former aristocratic arrogance. It was a raw, ugly sound of pure, unadulterated desperation. "Please, I am begging you. He is your husband. You loved him once. We are your family. You cannot send my son to federal prison. Please have mercy on us. Think about the family name. Think about the love you two shared. We can make this right. I will do anything you want. I will sign anything. Just do not let them take my boy away." I looked down at the sobbing woman clinging to my legs. I did not step back. I did not pull away. I simply stood there, an immovable pillar of stone, absorbing the absolute pathetic nature of her surrender. The entire room of influencers and guests stood in breathless silence, their phone cameras recording every agonizing second, broadcasting the great Beatrice Sterling begging on her knees to the entire world. I leaned down slightly, making sure my voice carried clearly over her pathetic, ragged sobs. "Family Beatrice." I asked, my tone ice-cold and razor-sharp. "That is a very interesting choice of words. Let us take a walk down memory lane, shall we?" I reached down, gripping her by the shoulders, and forced her to look up into my eyes. Her makeup was ruined, her face a mask of terror. "Do you remember exactly what you told me on the day of my wedding?" I asked, echoing the precise venom she had spat at me years ago. "You said the Sterling family requires a daughter-in-law who brings immense image value and high society leverage to the table. You said I was nothing but a pathetic charity case from a working-class neighborhood, a manipulative gold digger who tricked your brilliant son. You looked me dead in the eye and told me that someone with my low-class breeding could never possibly understand the sacred elite concept of family." Beatrice trembled violently, her mouth opening and closing in silent shock, as her own cruel, arrogant words were weaponized and fired directly back into her chest. "You were absolutely right, Beatrice." I continued, my voice echoing off the high ceilings as I released her shoulders and stood tall. "I am just a girl from the wrong side of the tracks. I have no concept of your elite family loyalty. Therefore, I have absolutely no mercy to give you." Before Beatrice could let out another agonizing scream, a sharp, piercing sound sliced through the heavy, suffocating air of the mansion. It started as a distant wail, growing rapidly louder, multiplying in volume and intensity, until the shrieking of multiple sirens echoed off the surrounding hills. Seconds later, violent, aggressive flashes of red and blue light swept across the expansive front windows, cutting through the darkness outside and illuminating the terrified faces of everyone in the foyer. The authorities had arrived. The heavy oak doors were thrown open with a force that rattled the door frames. A swarm of uniformed police officers and plainclothes federal agents poured into the grand foyer, their boots echoing sharply against the marble. The flashing red and blue lights from the cruisers parked outside cast harsh, chaotic shadows across the walls. The party guests immediately backed away, pressing themselves against the silk drapes, their phone cameras still recording every second of the unfolding disaster. Marcus Sterling, step away from the individuals and put your hands behind your back. A federal agent barked, flashing a badge. We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of wire fraud, bank fraud, and the forgery of federal lending documents. Marcus did not even try to resist. He was hauled up from the floor by two massive officers. The harsh metallic click of the handcuffs snapping shut around his wrists echoed through the dead silent room. The illusion of the powerful, untouchable CEO was completely shattered. He looked small, broken, and utterly pathetic. As the officers turned him toward the door, his bloodshot eyes locked onto mine. A look of profound, soul-crushing regret washed over his pale face. Maya, he choked out, his voice trembling with tears. Maya, please, I am so sorry. I was wrong. I was so blind. Please forgive me. I did not blink. I did not offer a single word of comfort. I simply turned my back to him, facing the fireplace, entirely dismissing his existence. He was dead to me, a ghost of a mistake I had finally laid to rest. I heard him sob as the officers forcibly dragged him out the front door and down the steps toward the waiting cruisers. Wait! You cannot arrest me, Brad yelled, backing away as two officers approached him. I did not know the documents were forged. I am just a venture capitalist. I am a victim. Tell that to the judge, Mr. Winston. The agent replied coldly, grabbing Brad by the shoulder and spinning him around. You signed a financial guarantee backed by fraudulent assets. That makes you a co-conspirator. You are under arrest. Brad thrashed and cursed, his face purple with rage, but it was useless. He was handcuffed and marched out right behind Marcus, his pristine designer suit wrinkling as he was shoved into the back of a police car. With the two men gone, the reality of the asset seizure fell squarely onto the women they had left behind. Jordan stepped toward Chloe, who was trembling violently by the staircase. He extended an open hand. The jewelry, Miss Chloe Jordan demanded, his voice entirely devoid of pity. Sobbing hysterically, Chloe unclasped the Cartier necklace and dropped it into Jordan's hand. She yanked the 5-carat diamond ring off her finger and practically threw it at him. Then, under the watchful eyes of my private security team, she was forced to step into an adjacent powder room and strip off the stolen couture gown. When she emerged, she was wearing a cheap, oversized neon yellow windbreaker borrowed from one of my parking attendants. She looked ridiculous. The glamorous, arrogant homewrecker had been reduced to a shivering, humiliated mess. As she was escorted out the front door, the influencers she had invited to show off her wealth showed no mercy. A dozen phone cameras were shoved in her face, camera flashes blinding her as they live-streamed her pathetic, empty-handed exit to millions of followers. Finally, Jordan turned to Beatrice and Jasmine. They were not allowed to go upstairs to retrieve their Louis Vuitton luggage or their designer wardrobes. My security guards handed them 3 heavy-duty black plastic garbage bags. They were given exactly 5 minutes to pack basic toiletries and whatever cheap, unbranded clothing they could find in the mudroom laundry pile. Beatrice, the woman who had spent years treating me like absolute dirt, sobbed uncontrollably as she dragged a black trash bag across the beautiful hardwood floors she used to claim as her own. Jasmine trailed behind her makeup ruined, clutching a plastic bag filled with nothing but sweatpants and a toothbrush. They walked out the grand front doors and descended the stone steps into the cold night air, leaving their entire empire behind. They had officially become homeless. The flashing red and blue lights finally faded into the distance, leaving the grand Sterling estate in absolute echoing silence. The chaotic swarm of influencers, disgraced socialites, and federal agents had completely cleared out. The massive mahogany front doors clicked shut, sealing out the noise of the outside world. Jordan approached me, his footsteps the only sound in the cavernous marble foyer. He offered a crisp, professional nod. "The operation is fully complete, Miss Maya," he stated, his voice ringing with quiet finality. Every bank account, trust fund, and offshore holding belonging to the Sterling family is officially frozen. The asset seizure is absolute and the transfers are verified. You own everything. I thanked him, and with a slight bow, he took his leave, leaving me entirely alone in the epicenter of my newly conquered kingdom. The camera slowly pulls back, revealing the sheer scale of the vacant, pristine living room. I stood alone in the center of the room, surrounded by the ghosts of the arrogance that used to haunt these walls. I let out a long, steady breath. Reaching up, I unpinned my hair, letting the tight coils cascade down my shoulders. I walked over to a gilded mirror and wiped away the heavy, suffocating layer of makeup I had worn like battle armor all evening. Finally, I kicked off those agonizingly high designer stilettos, letting my bare feet press against the cold, grounding marble floor. For the first time in 5 long years, I could actually breathe. The suffocating weight of the Sterling family and their toxic expectations was gone forever. To the outside world, my silence over the years had looked like cowardice. Beatrice and Marcus had constantly mistaken my patience for submission, assuming I was just a naive working-class girl too intimidated to ever fight back. They never realized they were simply oblivious pieces on my chessboard. Every insult I swallowed, every condescending remark I ignored, and every public humiliation I endured was a calculated, deliberate move. I had not been hiding in the shadows. I had been silently building an inescapable trap, securing my own untouchable empire while they carelessly dismantled theirs. Tonight was never an act of spontaneous rage. It was a masterful checkmate 5 years in the making. I walked over to the custom mahogany bar Marcus used to flaunt to his wealthy, arrogant friends. I bypassed the standard liquors and reached for the absolute most expensive, heavily guarded bottle of vintage red wine in his prized collection. I popped the cork, pouring a generous measure into a heavy crystal glass. The deep crimson liquid caught the dim, elegant light of the chandelier overhead. Carrying the glass, I pushed open the French doors and stepped out onto the expansive master balcony. The cool, crisp night breeze swept past me as I looked down at the sprawling, glittering skyline of Atlanta. The city lights burned bright against the dark sky, perfectly mirroring the brilliant, independent future I had just secured for myself. I stepped up to the stone railing, the camera zooming in close to capture the absolute serenity on my face. There was no anger left in my eyes, only supreme, untouchable power. I raised my crystal glass directly toward the lens in a silent, mocking toast to the family that tried to break me. I took a slow, deliberate sip, a deeply satisfied half-smile curling on my lips. My empire was finally mine. The screen slowly fades to black.